As many of you know, Holden is a fan of professional baseball. And so I found an interesting story which relates to our biblical narrative this morning. However, in the classical storytelling frame of a Paul Harvey story, I'm not going to tell you the ball player right away. Instead, I'm going to give some information about the life of a ball player to see if Holden and some of you other baseball fans here or even on Zoom can recognize who I'm describing. Footnote, I know Holden favors the Tigers, yet sadly, this ball player never played for the Tigers. Though fun tidbit, it was published that he had gotten into a fist fight with Detroit's manager, Ty Cobb. Might be a clue. Instead of playing for the Tigers, our mysterious ball player played for some team in New York. All right, yeah, that one, the Yankees. In 1925, he was scheduled to sit on the bench as a reserve first baseman. However, Wally Pipp had a headache and sat out the game, thus losing his position. Wally later said he took the most expensive aspirins in history. Replacing Wally in that game, our mysterious ball player played first base position for the next 14 years and retired after playing in 2,130 consecutive games. Sporting the number 4 on his jersey. Kind of got a clue now? Yeah, give you some more. Sporting the number 4 on his jersey, he was the cleanup hitter and always batted after Babe Ruth until an illness ended his baseball career. Retired, he was approached by the mayor of New York and was asked to become the city's parole commissioner. Accepting the role on January 3rd, 1940, a few months later, he was sitting across the desk from a 19-year-old who had been in and out of jail and had been sentenced to reform school once already. The young criminal, Rocco Barbella, sat across the desk from the former ball player, and though Rocco recognized the man, he could care less. After throwing a string of profanities at him, the former ball player took everything in stride and calmly told Rocco that he would be returning to the reform school where one day he would realize the punishment was for his own good. You know that former ball player was correct. Rocco later changed his name to Rocky Graziano, and in his biography, which was turned into a film called Somebody Up There Likes Me, he acknowledged that the former New York Yankees ball player who became the parole commissioner for New York saw something in him that no one else did. And he wasn't alone. At the funeral of Lou Gehrig, who is our mysterious ball player, over 100 men, all persons he assisted to turn their lives around, visited the church to pay their respects. Lou Gehrig planned to have a long career playing baseball, and though physical situations changed that, he became influential in turning lives around and offering grace and redemption to troubled souls. The youth in our scripture reading, Samuel, had a similar experience. At the age of 10, his mother fulfilled her promise to God and dedicated her son to God. Samuel assumed that he would live in the temple for the rest of his life as his mentor Eli, the high priest, was training him for a life of service in the temple. However, on the night Samuel heard God speak, he was informed that he would take a different path. Instead of becoming a priest, Samuel would become a prophet who would later be given responsibility to preside over Israel's national and international affairs. He would become responsible for their homeland security as they were facing an international superpower. And later, he was authorized by the people to select a king who would care for their nation. And later, he was responsible for replacing King Saul, who had become corrupt and defiled God's instructions. And he chose David to rule as Israel's king. Samuel had quite an interesting career, one that, like Lou Gehrig, he never saw coming. Yet their journeys experienced incredible opportunities which transformed multiple lives. In Samuel's case, he transformed a simple shepherd into a mighty king who wrote and authorized others to write the writings which created the book of Psalms, which still inspire hope, offer healing and peace when we lose a loved one, and assist us to experience God. In Lou Gehrig's case, he helped several men avoid prison so they could live into their full potential. Lou also delivered a powerful speech, which was replayed or reenacted this past Wednesday at all of our Major League Baseball parks, titled The Luckiest Man's Speech, which inspired persons with cancer and life-threatening diseases to never give up on themselves. but to always be grateful that they have an awful lot to live for. And we certainly do, whether we're sick or healthy, on a pursuit of a life goal which is altered due to things beyond our control, or when our dreams and plans get altered in significant ways, like when a global pandemic strikes, and thus our plans for the present and the future changes. And yet, we have an awful lot to live for. And even though we may not immediately recognize what the correct course for our lives might be when our path of life is interrupted or altered, the key is, as Samuel discovered when he was only 12 years old, if we allow ourselves to be flexible and open to God, then we might discover all sorts of exciting things which may change our lives and our life pursuits while changing the lives of others. An example of this is seen in the life of E. Stanley Jones. After Stanley graduated from Osbury College at the age of 23, his grade point average was so great, the president of the college personally asked him to remain at the college as a professor, thus fulfilling a lifetime dream Stanley had of teaching at the college. But he said later that he heard God's voice calling him to be a missionary in India. While in India, he preached the gospel and cared for people. He also created an ecumenical movement that laid the foundation for a process of reconciliation among the higher and lower castes of people. Reports of his work in India to dismantle the caste system and bring various persons together to discover peaceful resolutions made their way back to the U.S. congregations. Admired for his wisdom and virtuous living as he lived out the gospel message, he became a spiritual advisor and confidant for Franklin D. Roosevelt. Prior to World War II, he was flown from India to Baltimore to meet with the president. And just months leading up to December 7th, 1941, he was working with Japanese and American leaders to prevent a war between us. However, he writes that he recognized that he failed to convince Japanese leaders to work for peace. Yet his patience and deep care for people prevented him from holding a grudge. This enabled him to become instrumental. And after the war, he went on to guide conversations which created reconciliation between Asia, Africa, Japan, and the United States. While guiding the peaceful negotiations, Stanley returned to India, became close friends with Gandhi. And following Gandhi's death, Stanley sought healing after losing a good friend, which he discovered when he wrote a biography about Gandhi's life and his nonviolent living. Incredibly, it was this very biography which inspired the Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. to seek peaceful resolutions for race relations. And it was that book which shaped his view for nonviolence in the civil rights movement. Though Stanley never became a professor at Osbury, his peaceful and reconciliation teachings had a far greater reach with both persons and nations. His writings and his lessons provided persons the opportunity to live into their full potential. And today, Holden, you, like many of us, are prepared to go forth and blaze your own trail as you pursue your dreams. You're preparing to go forth to college, a brave new world for you. As we ourselves are finally able to leave COVID behind and embrace a brave new world as well. Who knows what you and what we will encounter? Who knows what new visions or dreams we will receive? None of us knows for sure what path you will ultimately take. A path that could take you to foreign lands, a path that might lead you to do something completely different than what you want to study for in college, or what changes you will have in your major field of study. And who knows what you will encounter as you focus on obtaining a Bachelor of Science in business. And currently, it's too soon to predict how your kindness to others through your Christian journey will impact their lives. Thankfully, as the biblical narrative reveals in Samuel's story, God provided Samuel with a mentor. And granted, even though it took 3 tries for his mentor to remember how to hear God's voice, Eli was able to instruct Samuel in the ways of the Lord. Eli taught Samuel how to hear God, and Eli provided Samuel a powerful lesson. Stop and rest, lie down, take the call from God by responding. Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. And then listen. After listening, God will reveal paths for you to follow, and God will utilize you and your good works to create something new and good. And be encouraged. For God will use your good works like E. Stanley Jones. Your works in life may come full circle. It just requires that first step in faith, stopping to rest, taking God's call, and listening. After all, God pledges a new thing, which will cause our ears to tingle as you have an awful lot to live for, experience, and share with others. May God bless you on your journey as you remain faithful and ever mindful of God's still speaking voice.